それでは、時間になったので、始めたいと思います。It's time to start. And, 今日の、講義は、ルカ・タテオ先生がしてくださいます。Today's lecturer is Dr. ルカ・タテオ。そして、土本哲平先生が、指定討論者、指定質問、ないしは指定討論をしてくださいます。Discussant is Dr. 哲平土本。And 佐藤達也先生が、解説、翻訳解説をしてくださいます。Dr. 達也佐藤 will translate and explain his lecture. はい。それでは、佐藤先生、一言、センター長としてご挨拶お願いできますか？
Hi, hello everyone. So I'm a leader of center, and so I welcome many persons. And I hear a colleague from Norway we join in this evening meeting. So please raise a hand. Say hello to Christine. Thank you. Thank you for coming. And Francesco also joined tonight. Thank you very much. Luca, please tell me the impression of last week's conference at Matsuyama.
Hi, Tatsuya. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here tonight. Well, the conference was very, very interesting, and I didn't honestly I didn't know that there was such a big group in Japan working on TEA. I was very, very happy to know. I was very, very happy also to see that there is an interest in developing the dialogical self group. I think it's also very important. And yeah, and I had wonderful conversations with a lot of people. Was a very, very, very interesting experience. I really enjoyed. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. So today, you will give a small lecture on cultural psychology and ecocentric self. Thank you. And Teppei Tsuchimoto put Japanese into your PowerPoint, so I think many Japanese audience can understand what you say. I hope so. So I will not translate one slide. So later, I will sometimes I will explain by Japanese. Okay? Yeah.
Okay.
After your lecture, Teppei will start the discussion, and then audience will join the discussion. Okay.
Perfect.
Sorry, one minute. 本日はですね、ルカ・タテオ先生が、最新のエコですね、エゴセントリックじゃなくて、エコセントリックセルフということについて話していただきます。レジュメについては、土本哲平先生が日本語を入れていますので、かなり理解しやすいと思います。時々私、日本語で解説して、すべてレクチャー終わった後は、土本哲平先生がディスカッションの口火を切って、その後は皆さんで話をするということにしたいと思います。So let's get started. So Luca, please start your talk.
Yes,
Okay.
and you will tell me when I have to stop. Okay, okay? Super.
Okay.
So let me start sharing my slides. Can you see the slides? Okay. So again, thank you very much for having me here. It's a great pleasure. I always enjoy the discussions in this group, and that's why tonight I decided to share with you some very new ideas. So the things I will talk about tonight are the new projects, the new research concepts I'm working on. So you will find, of course, that some are very initial, are not well defined, but that's exactly why I wanted to share them with you, so to get your very important feedback and help me to develop further these ideas. You will see many more slides than I will actually use, so I will skip because as Sato Sensei and Tsushimoto Sensei, they told me that they were going to share the slides with you. I took the opportunity to add some additional information, for instance, about cultural psychology in my understanding, and also some additional theoretical reference. So even if I don't talk about everything tonight because of the time, you will have the opportunity to see the slides and to use them if you want. Okay. So first, I just a couple of words about myself. I'm currently a professor at the University of Oslo. I'm at the Department of Special Needs Education, but I must say that I consider myself a humanist because I think it's very important in my background, in my education, but also for the job, for the work of psychologists, to have a humanistic background. So working not only with psychology as a specialty, but working with anthropology, history, philosophy, developmental sciences, ethnology, and this was used to be actually the education of the founders of psychological sciences. Okay, so I think we should go back to that rich background, which is actually characteristic of our group that is doing cultural psychology. So you will see I will touch very different fields. Now, let me start by saying that the things I will talk about refer to a complexity of human psyche that cannot be reduced to single functions or to single processes. What we have in mind is the human being as a whole. That's the perspective of cultural psychology. But tonight, I will focus on I will do a step forward to this because it is true that psychology can be understood as the science of the subject, as the science of the human being, and that's why I will talk about psychology as egocentric and ethnocentric science. So we look at the psychological process from the point of view of the person, which is of course very important, and from the point of view of our culture. But in the last years, I'm feeling more and more important also to reflect about what is the place of the human being within the planet ecosystem. So it's not just the human being as and the meaning of being a person and of being a person as part of that whole that we call culture. But I think that the humankind in this particular, especially in this particular historical moment, needs to understand what is the place of the human being within the planet, in the planet. And I think that cultural psychology has something to say about that. And in particular, my interest is in understanding how we can advance the epistemology of psychology, so to turn psychology into an ecological science. So a science that is able to understand the complex interdependencies, not only of the human being with the other human beings, but the human being within the planet ecosystem. So that's my long-term goal. And I'm just at the beginning of this process, so you will see that my ideas are really initial and really unripe. So the first question is, of course, where do we start if we want to build an ecological psychology, or a psychology which is based on ecological principles? Of course, when we mention ecological psychology, the first references that we come in mind are, of course, Gregory Bateson, for instance, with his ecological approach, or Bronfenbrenner with this, who was the first who one of the first who tried to build a theory of the human being as part of a system, and the importance of the relationship between the person and the environment for the psychological development. So what actually was trying to do, and that's why Bronfenbrenner is my starting point tonight, is Bronfenbrenner, he was trying actually to overcome that dualism between nature and nurture that at that time was central still for psychology. So he tried to overcome the question whether the biological comes first or the cultural comes first. And he was doing this by the light of epigenetics. Epigenetics that in that historical moment was developing is basically the idea that our genes, our genetic background capital is not just based on a chain of causal relationships. So we becomes what we are because of our genes, but it's just part of an ecosystem. The genes, they interact in complex ways. They are interdependent with the environment, and they are also interdependent with the person development. Okay, so basically, epigenetics is the idea that our genetic potential is realized into a phenotype, but this happens within an ecosystem. So again, what is important is the concept of interdependencies. But still, what is for me the limit of Bronfenbrenner approach is that he is, of course, interested in the development of the person. So he basically says that, of course, each person has a potential, which is the produced by the interaction of the genotype and phenotype. And this potential develops, unfolds in very different possible ways through what? Through the interaction with our significant others, who provide us with what he called opportunity structures. That is what we will call the context or the direct environment. And through repeated interactions with these opportunity structures in our immediate environment, we develop along certain trajectories. Where is the environment here? Here, the environment is not acting directly on the person, but what we call the distal system. So, for instance, the larger environment, even up to the social policies, they actually act on the opportunity structure. So they create different settings of opportunities for development. This is, of course, quite ecological as a model, but is not ecological in the sense we understand today. Why? Because this idea, for instance, is still centered on the person. So the person is still the center of interest. And it does not establish, or it does not understands the co-development of the person and its ecosystem through the time, through the environment. So that was one starting point. The other starting point of my reflection is a bit different and is also a bit awkward. Okay, you all are familiar with Theodor Fechner. Okay, and you all know Fechner from since probably your studies from the textbooks as the father of physiopsychology or physiological psychology, or the foundation of psychology in physiological processes. However, again, Fechner was a complex person. As all the founders of psychology, he was not only a specialist of psychology, but he was a humanist. Okay, so he was an intellectual, basically. So, of course, as any intellectual, he engaged in many questions and directions. And one question that he asked himself, and I found this very interesting, is at a certain point, he wrote a book to answer the question whether the plants have a mental life. So, do the plants have a mental life? And the title of this book is Nanna. I mean, you can find this kind of awkward. Okay, it's we think of Fechner as a positivist, right? As an empiricist. Actually, by the way, he also wrote a book about the angels, whether the angels exist. But again, that was quite common at the time to ask these metaphysical questions. But in this book, why this book is interesting? Because Fechner asked this question: is if the plants have a psychological life, okay, would we be able to see it? Because from our human perspective, psychological life, and from his psychophysiological perspective, the mental life needs, for instance, some structures, some physical structures. So nerves, brain, neurons, okay? And we recognize this, for instance, more or less in all the animals. And we also created a hierarchy, right? So some animals are less developed or have the less developed psychological life because their neurological system is less developed than human beings. So human beings are on top of the hierarchy. So Fechner started to say, okay, what if the plants have a psychological life, but of course it cannot be similar to our psychological life because plants do not have nerves, they do not have muscles, they do not have a brain. And he wrote these very interesting books, and it's interesting for two reasons. First, because he is the first attempt that I could find of trying to imagine psychological life from the radical alterity. Okay, for instance, cultural psychology deals with the idea that psychological processes are historically and situated in space and time, and they develop in a certain way because they happen in a certain place and a certain time under certain conditions. But still, we think that some aspect of being human are universal. So it's very interesting when Fechner start to ask us, hey, how would be the psychological life of a radical different being? That's the first thing. And the second, of course, the second question is how we could understand this. If this is true, would we ever be able to know if it's true? Now, this sounds a very strange and awkward question, but actually it has to do with the fundamental psychological question that, by the way, is one of the questions asked by Hermans in the theory of dialogical self. So, how it happens that the beings that are surrounding us, that are part of our significant relationships, how these beings, they become part of our self, how they contribute to the development of our self. Of course, Hubert Ehrman's, he focused on other human beings. So how we internalize the voices of other human beings, and they become high positions, and they become part of what he called the society of the self. But what happens with non-humans? Are there voices of the self or part of the society of the self that are linked to non-human significant others? I would say that if you have a pet at home, a cat or a dog, you will probably answer yes to this question. Because the pets are the first probably human living beings, non-human living beings, for which we feel a certain relationship. But what happens with completely non-human voices? Like, for instance, the plants, in the case of Fechner. Well, this idea is not so uh, unusual in psychology, because if we go back also to psychoanalysis, one of the ideas that Freud developed was the idea that the ego develops through a progressive differentiation from the world, but still especially in the initial undifferentiated condition, the ego includes everything. So we and the world are one. And in some areas of ecological psychology, of environmental psychology, this is interpreted as the fact that at unconscious level, we still have a deep connection with all the living beings in the world. And this unconscious connection can be the starting point for acknowledging or recognizing that we are part of the planet. So it can be one hope for the future of humankind, if you want to solve the environmental crisis. But again, what we don't find yet in psychology, and that's my point, and then I move to the second part of my presentation. What we don't find in psychology, but find we will see in many other expressions of human activity, is the idea that human psyche is not the center of the world, but is one of the parts of a totality, which is a totality of interdependencies. Okay, I found this. This is an Italian painter, Antonio Ligabue, and he had one of the constant themes of his painting is exactly that. Is exactly that human being is just part of the cycle of life. The circle of life is not so important. We are not so important as we believe to be. So that was to set somehow the stage of the problem.
Okay,
Now,
Ricardo, sorry.
please.
はい、じゃあすいません。解説って言っても難しいんだけど、今、まず、パワーポイントは皆さんお手元に行ってるので、まあ、それ見ながらやってくださいねっていうことで、今日の話は、まあ、文化心理学っていうことの中でやってきますっていうのが一つで、あともう一つは、おそらくですね、人間を全体として捉えるっていうことと、いろんなものが交互になんだっけ、インターディペンデンスですね、交互に依存してるっていうのが、まあ、なんて訳していいか分かんないですけども、そういうものとして見ていく必要があるということを言ってます。で、まあ、文脈とか全体ってことをやるときには、ベイトソンとブランフェンブレンナーっていうことが大事な人間になるので、ブロンフェンブレンナーの生態学モデルなんて出てきてますけれども、そこではまあ言ってたことを拾ってみると、あれですね、パーソンがセンターになってるっていうことでいいのか、まあ、これでエコシステムっていうのはやれるんだけれども、パーソンと他のものの関係っていうのをフラッと見ていく必要がないんじゃないかということです。で、次に、ナンナ、ですね、っていうのが出てきて、これもちょっと分かりにくいと思いますが、これフェヒナーっていうのはすごい有名人で、フェクナーっていうふうに発音しましたけども、フェヒナーは精神物理学を始めた人なんだけれども、植物の精神生活みたいなね、そういうこともやっていたということで、まあ、動物の心理学って驚かないと思いますけども、植物の心理学みたいなこともやってましたよっていうことで、おそらくその人間と他の対象って考えるんじゃなくって、まあ、いろんな中には、まあ、それぞれ主体的な存在があるんじゃないかということですね。で、人間以外の声もあるし、それを私たちはどうやって聞くことができるのかっていうこと、まあ、自分たちの生態系、自分中心にやるんじゃなくって、他の可能性もあるんじゃないですかというようなことを言っていたんだと思います。まあ、ちょっと、まあ、よく私も分かりませんけれども、まあ、そんなことを言っているということで、分からないところは皆さん、本人に質問してください。Thank you. So sorry to stop you. Thank you.
No problem. Sorry, I've been talking too much already. I will now try to be more synthetic. The problem, how we can think about a more ecological psychology. Part of the answer, we need a foundation, and if we cannot find these principles within psychology, we can look a bit outside of psychology, and in particular in developmental sciences. So I will refer to some principle of developmental sciences that have been defined by Heinz Werner. And I think that it's very important because Werner actually had what I define ecological epistemology. So he basically defined the principle of development of life. That's the idea of Heinz Werner. Okay, and what are these principles according to Werner? So all the living system develop in this way, based on these principles. The first is the principle of telos. So development is not determined from the beginning, okay, but is not completely random. Every time development take one direction, this direction is somehow restricting or guiding, channeling the possibilities of future direction, but is not determining them. So That's why he does not talk about causality in development, but direction. And this direction still have some degrees of freedom. The second important point is the relationship between structure and function. Okay, structuralism versus functionalism was one of the other two big fight, right? Oppositions in social sciences. Well, what Werner say is that every unit of analysis that we observe, depending on the perspective, can be a node, a point-like, but if can be a unit. But if we zoom in, we will see that this unit, apparent unit, is actually a field, is a system in itself. It depends on the perspective that we take. And this is very important because this has to do with what is an individual. For instance, the unit of analysis of psychology could be the person, right? So the person is an individual. But are we sure? Are we, for instance, not a system in itself made of parts? Where is the border of our identity? For instance, we are not one single being. There are a lot of other beings who lives in our body, for instance. We share our body with bacteria, for instance. And these bacteria are in symbiotic relationships with us. Different bacteria would even lead to different behavior or different emotional experience of us. So are we really an individual? Or if we go outside, okay, what is the unit of analysis? We say in cultural psychology, for instance, that there is not such a thing as an isolated individual. We are, since before we are born, we are part of a social system. Okay, we are involved in social relationships. So you see, depending on where we zoom in or out, a structure becomes, a unit becomes a system. Another important point is the hierarchical ordering. So considering phenomena always as a whole parts relationship. And whole and parts are not symmetrical. Okay, so imagine what I mentioned at the beginning. What is psychic life? Okay, psychic life is a configuration of parts-whole relationship, and during our life, the importance and the relevance of one or the other psychological function changes depending on the contextual condition. So, for instance, when you enter formal education, formal schooling, some psychological function become more relevant than other. Okay, so the configuration changes. And the other important concept is that development is made of qualitative leaps. So development is not continuous. There are new forms emerging. There is transformation. There is different timing in development. So these principles are very important because they lead to the main idea of Werner, the so-called orthogenetic principle. So developmental processes of all living beings are a unity of process of differentiation. So the more we develop, the more the system becomes differentiated and specialized, and the more there are hierarchical organization emerging. So development is a sort of dance between differentiation and structure, differentiation and structure. And you can observe this at every level of life, from the cell to the society. I don't know if you want me to stop or go on a little bit. That's it.
Okay, yeah, thank you, thank you.
うん
で、はなんだっけ、認識論的基盤っていうことで、多様性と発達っていうことで、ウェルナーですね。これ、ウェルナーは、戦前の心理学者ですけども、まあ、今、文化心理学では、なんていうかな、非常にその考え方が重視されている人で、まあ、発達っていったときには、目的がある、構造と機能がある、あと秩序っていうのは階層的に秩序になっていくというようなことですね。あと、質的な跳躍があって、そういうようなことがありますよということです。で、発達っていうのは分化してまとまって分化してまとまってっていう、そういうようなことについて、考えるんですよということですね。はい。で、Thanks and sorry, Luca. その one research assistant developed the translation system. So what you say and Japanese. So
Wow.
it's a tentative. It's a tentative, but so it helps Japanese audience. So
Okay, perfect, perfect.
please
Okay,
continue. Okay.
okay. So
Mm.
just to mention that this idea, you can find this idea in other authors. Okay, so sorry, just to I had to mention this. So what is important is that uh, the principle of Telos says that development is time asymmetrical. What does it mean? It means that life cannot come back. So the development of living system cannot never be set back to a previous condition. That's a fundamental principle. Okay? Life cannot be undone. And you find this idea, this type of ideas, also in other authors like Kurt Lewin in same period and Vygotsky. But I will skip this part. So, starting from these principles, we can start to look at what I call the third level psychological processes. And as I said, one of the important point is that life goes towards diversity, is pointing towards diversity. Living systems tend to become diverse and to become organized, structured in part wall relationships. Okay. Now, the idea of diversity has been used in many fields. Okay. In my field of work, usual field of work, which are psychology and education, I think that so far diversity and diversification have been considered a problem. For instance, in education, diversity in classroom is still a practical problem. It's not considered a resource, for instance. And you find diversity, as I was saying, at every level of life organization, from the biological level to the anthropological level to the social level, the sociological level. So diversity is a characteristic of life. And one of the point is, how can psychology deal or understand or include diversity into its way of thinking? So far, and this is my critical point, so far psychology had a problem with diversity. And why? Because psychology is still for a very relevant part, ethnocentric science. we have two tendencies in psychology. One is the universalistic tendency. So the idea to say that the mind is the same everywhere, the brain is the same everywhere, function in the same way, that our psychological constructs are universal. And that's so we can compare, okay, human beings everywhere. That's one tendency. The other tendency is the tendency of identifying culture with national identities. So, for instance, in cross-cultural psychology, we have comparison between Americans and Japanese, as if American, Japanese, Italian, or whatever were a psychological homogeneous category. While, for instance, if you are following a little bit what's going on in the United States in these days, you realize that definitely is not a unique psychological, a unique category from a psychological group. But still you have these two tendencies, universalism versus nationalism in psychology. If we take in instead this perspective, sorry, the perspective of Heinz Werner, then we have to see the relationship between levels from a different point of view. Okay, so the idea is that if psychological functioning is a function of, is a relationship between parts of a system, okay? Psychological life will tend to diversity and hierarchization at all levels, okay? But what is important is that this will also happens across levels. And it means that if we any change at any level of the system of the whole part relationship will affect somehow is related is part of a network of interdependencies at the other levels. In the current mainstream idea is you find in psychology, you find the idea that the lower level are affecting the higher levels. Okay, that's the most common idea. But in a systemic perspective, what you have to look at is the interdependency between levels. I will give some example to be more clear. Okay. So this is what I just mentioned before. So the idea that the problem with psychology is the limit of psychology. That the reason for it does not is not yet an ecological science is that we have the idea of the person has center, but we also have a normalizing idea of the person, or how the person is as should be. So what we do is we tend in psychology to reduce diversity. For instance, psychology is based on the idea of intervention, which is always an intervention on the person. So in psychology, it's the person who must change. Is not, for instance, the environment that must change. That's one of the main political, I think, issues in the current psychology, in the current neoliberal framework of psychology. Other perspectives say, no, wait, it's if we reverse the idea of diversity. So it's not diversity an exceptionality, a superficial exceptionality, while we are all based on the same deep structure. if we reverse this idea, sorry, sorry, I will skip also this part because otherwise I will not have time. So let's move directly to this point. So what is the direction I'm trying to take, I'm trying to develop now? The idea is that, as I discussed so far, the current way in which psychology is looking at the human being is egocentric. What does it mean? It means that there is a progressive differentiation between the ego and the world. And this is one, for instance, of the processes that are called identification, um, individualization. Okay, there are different terms for this. So, and this duality is still at the core of the way we see the human being. And this duality, the ego and the world, is also the same duality that we find in the current pathological or problematic relationship between the human being and the environment. Okay, so what we have created this duality, and now we are struggling to overcome it. Because if continue to have this idea of me, the person and the world as two separate entities, of course, we will always have the problem of putting them again together. So what instead I've started to explore are different ways of understanding the relationship between the person and the world. And you find this different perspective in non-Western psychological systems, because the idea, the duality between the person and the world is, of course, based on one worldview, one cosmology, which is the cosmology emerging from the Western rationalistic, the Western rationalistic tradition, that leads to the idea that the human being is on top, is at the top of the hierarchy, and has so the possibility of relating to the world as an object. What are different perspectives, different cosmologies? If instead of considering the person and the world as two separate things, we start considering, taking the ecological perspective as the person and the world has in a whole-part relationship. So what does it mean? It means, first of all, that person and the world, they form a system. And you cannot take out one part without changing all the system. So there is not such a thing as a person separated from, or a duality person-world. The ecological perspective instead consider always the network of interdependencies between the beings. So a system is defined, an ecosystem is defined by all the beings who have relationship of interdependency. If we take this idea, then it is possible to start thinking as to the self as one of this network of interdependencies. So I'm not who I am because I am separated, but I am who I am because I'm part of the network of interdependencies with the world. Without those interdependencies, I would not be me. Where do we find similar visions, for instance? We find this similar vision in many traditional psychological systems, for instance. These psychological systems are exactly based on the idea of interdependency. So, for instance, the person is defined, the identity, the place of the person in the world is defined by the network of relationship that link the person to other human beings, to natural beings, even to spiritual beings. It's very interesting because in this worldviews, the illness, the condition of illness, of disease, is nothing but the interruption of these interdependencies. So a person who is suffering is a person who has lost her place in the network of interdependencies. So you don't know anymore who you are. Why? Because again, what we are is defined by who we relate to, who we exchange to, who complements us. As you can see, this is a completely different perspective from psychology, which is actually currently based on the opposite, on the fact that you are yourself. You must be independent, on stand by yourself. Yes, so that's where I so far, I arrived so far. And just a last word, because I'm running out of time. I'm sorry. Just a last word. I tried, for instance, to reason in the end of this talk. I tried to reason about how could an ecocentric perspective work with a model as the TEM. The TEM, for instance, the TEM model is a model based on the subjective experience, on the subjective trajectory, right? In which, again, the social relationships are understood as either form of constraint or form of promotion of certain turning direction of certain trajectories. Okay, but if instead we zoom in the turning point of a life trajectory, for instance, even the obligatory passage points in Tatsuya theorization. If we zoom in, we see that these can be understood not as just influences of external factor, because external factor can have an influences only if we are in a relation of interdependency, a partward relationship with them. So they must be we form a system with even with the what apparently are external factor. So if we zoom in, we can see that even in what appears to be a point, like an obligatory passage point, we are dealing with a field, with something which is made of part and relationship between parts. The same again when the TEM model is for instance, setting theoretically the equifinality point and the alternative equifinality point, sorry. Actually, what is describing is another form of complementarity. So they are not opposites. The equifinality point acquires its meaning, and that's the intuition, the great intuition of, I think, of Tatsuya. Acquires its meaningfulness exactly because it becomes part of the system. Because alone, it will be not impossible to get the meaning. I stop here, sorry, because I've been talking too much. I apologize. And I'm very, very eager to listen to Tepe commentary. So thank you very much. And here you have also some references, but
Thank
I
you,
will
thank
share
you,
the slides. Thank you very
thank you,
much.
ルカ。ちょっと最後の方、少しだけ解説してみますねと。ポイントは2つぐらい、解説すべきポイントは2つぐらいなので、これですね、はい。で、よく知られているように、西洋的なモデル、私と世界っていうものが対立してるんだけども、まあ、対極拳的というべきか、アジア的なものってのはこんな感じになっているということで、私と私以外のものが包摂的分離、これは文化心理学のすごく重要な概念だと思います。インクルーシブセパレーションですね。not separation, but inclusive セパレーション。すいません。で、これか。すいません。間違えた。これですね。はい。エコセントリックセリフっていうのはこういうふうに表されて、私と私じゃないもの、愛とノット愛っていうのが、こういう形で、対立してるんじゃなくって、包摂的分離なんですよと。こういうふうに考えていく必要があるんじゃないですかというふうに言っていると。で、このような考え方っていうのはいろんなところでありますねと。で、最後、テムに応用したらどうなるんでしょうかというようなことを少し説明してくれて、まあ、いろんなところでいろんな出来事を PFP、OPP あるんだけども、そこのところを虫眼鏡で見てみると、単なるポイントではなくて、いろんなものが相互的に、相互依存性ですか、今日の言葉で言うと、そういうふうになっているということは分かりますねと。で、最後に EFP と PEFP の関係っていうのも対立ではなくって、双方的なものなんだと。これはすごく大事な点で、EFP を設定した後に、その PEFP はどういうものであるかっていう、双方的な関係として見つけることができると次元としてうまく使えるわけですけども、そういうことをルカも言っていたということです。で、今日はエコセントリックなセルフということで1時間ほどお話しいただきましたということで、改めて拍手をお願いします。Thank you, Luca, for giving us new innovative ideas. So Tepe will talk and discuss with your idea and ask some questions. Then audience have a time to discuss each other. OK。じゃあ、そういうことで、ツッチーが最初質問してもらって、あとはオーディエンスから議論しましょう。はい、よろしくお願いします。
はい。日本語も入れますかと、最後に。
ちょっと自分で解説してみてください。
軽く、はい。Thank you, Luca and Sato sensei, to introduce me to the first question in this. Yeah. And so today I would like to present share my idea about this, about hierarchy notion. But so before starting the presentation, I would like to say thank you for very much, Luca, for your wonderful presentation. It was truly inspiring because it impressed me very much because your scheme deeply explores the inseparable interconnections between the self and the umwelt, surrounding world of semiotic world of the organism, and how it models their complementarity relationship with such remarkable precision. So following Luca's rich presentation on ecocentric self, what I'm talking about is make all of you a bit confusing. However, I would like to introduce part of my no, not part and whole of my theoretical ideas in order to express where my interest lie. And it may be resonate to your idea of ecocentric self. It is not the same, but similar way I construct the relationship between the semiotic or cultural construction of the self, relationship relate to the environment. So I would like to ask you a question regarding to the relationship between the body and the science. So this is an example of when we engage in act such as drawing, there are moments when we unexpectedly create a beautiful form, lines or colors we never consciously intended, and we feel as though our body is moving forward. So such forward movement of the body is not mere physical motion, but a manifestation of a transformation in the co-generative relationship between the self and environment. So I conceptualize this kind of relational dynamic between the body and the science as a mutual process using the notion of heterarchy. So before introducing the concept of heterarchy, it is necessary to first explain Valsina's notion of sign hierarchy, which forms my conceptual basis. And this model of development as a construction of a hierarchy through semiotic inhibition relationships, starting from bodily feelings. For example, when you feel like eating cake, the sign eat cake like this, I want to eat cake, maybe inhibit it because you are on a diet. However, today happens to be your birthday. You may then inhibit the past inhibition and decide to eat cake after all. However, and so on. This hierarchical relationship among signs establish one-dimensional structure. In other words, the act of eating cake, sign hierarchy may become oriented as a good things within the process. So, however, when the system reaches at the bifurcation point, at a certain moment, a system, there is a qualitative leap of experience by affective hypergeneralization or the destruction of the whole structure of the sign hierarchy occurs. So what is important, even more important, is that the hypergeneralized semiotic field feed into the bodily level, emerging a new quality of experiences. That is qualitative leaf you mentioned in the presentation. So, however, such a model may appear to be one-dimensional and upward-oriented structure, which goes against Valshina's original intention, I believe. Therefore, my colleague and I have illustrated, like, how the value orientations can shift over the life course. So this is my first idea of my original original of the idea of heterarchy. So this notion is referred to our lived bodily feeling flow, and the notion is a dialectically complementary counterpart of hierarchy. As I mentioned, this notion is originally derived from McRoach, who examined value anomalies and circularity in neural networks. It is a network-like model, and the dimension of time does not exist. And here, heterarchy is a field rich with potential, one that enables us to generate new dimensions of value. And thirdly, circularity of heterarchy is important. It means the feed ability between body and sign. And this hierarchy in that hypergeneralized feeling feed forward into the heterarchy, and this becomes the basic flow of the body to create a new next new hierarchy. And finally, is importantly, this notion emphasizes that the present hierarchy A does not have a static structure, but that it changes dynamically to the next hierarchy B, C, D throughout the heterarchical change. This is a model of the dynamics between heterarchy and hierarchy. This circle, circle means hierarchy, and it has a one dimension, but in the living process, the dimension changes like this. So we often create a dimension of the sign hierarchy, but it sometimes reaches a bifurcation point, feeding forward to the new next heterarchy. So this kind of dynamics can be occur in the unique way for our human beings. So my point here is this boundary between the present heterarchy to the next heterarchy. In the boundary, new experiencing emerge. And this is very important process for understanding how human beings moving forward to the next living process. So yeah, so I think this is my question. My question is that when the present body transitioning towards the next moment, what happens at the boundary? Because this kind of boundary can be understood as a moment when the ego separates itself from the external world, Umwelt, and connects with a new external world. So maybe this question can deepen your deepen our understanding of your theoretical scheme. Okay, so thank you for thank you for listening. This is my end of presentation.